compares your father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even your own life. Otherwise, you cannot be my disciple. And if you do not carry your own cross and follow me, you cannot be my disciple. But don't begin until you count the cost. For who would begin construction of a building without first calculating the cost to see if there's enough money to finish it? Otherwise, you might complete only the foundation before running out of money, and then everyone would laugh at you. They would say, there's the person who started that building and couldn't afford to finish it. Or what king would go to war against another king without first sitting down with his counselors to discuss whether his army of 10,000 could defeat the 20,000 soldiers marching against him? And if he can't, he will send a delegation to discuss terms of peace while the enemy is still far away. So you cannot become my disciple without giving up everything you own. Doesn't really seem like a good sales pitch, does it, to become a disciple? We know the first part, and we love the first part of the verse in 1 John 3:16. By this we know love, that he laid down his life for us. I mean, that's great, thinking about someone who loves you so much, willing to give up their life. But it's the second part that sometimes is a little tough, right? And we also ought to lay down our lives. Then you have the Luke passage that talks about counting the cost. And you know, as I said, I've been a Christian a long time. I first came to the Lord when I was 7, and then recommitted when I was 16, and then in college again. And so even though I was a believer that whole time, I wasn't following wholeheartedly after the Lord. There were times that I kind of wandered and then came back. But I've been around a long time and watched the church, whether it be in the U.S. or worldwide, and the various changes. And, you know, being in Africa, I'd be in Africa for a few years and then come back here. And being gone for 4 years, when you come back, you probably notice the changes more than if you just live here. It's like the frog being boiled in water slowly, right? And so I'd really noticed some changes. And for a few decades in the U.S., the gospel's often been presented with that first part, which is absolutely true and totally wonderful, but without the second part. That's like, you know, those things we buy that have the fine print. And the problem is that many of the promises in the Bible are what we call if-then statements. I homeschooled, and so this was in critical thinking. This is where you learn about if-then statements. The second half of the statement is conditional on the first half being met. Or the second part will just naturally happen if the first part happens. So there's a lot of verses in the Bible. If you love me, you will obey my commands. Or if you seek me, you will find me. Okay? He's not talking about just being saved. All right? That whole time, from the time I was 7 to now, I was saved. But I really wasn't always a follower, a disciple of Jesus. And there's a difference. And I'm here to tell you that there is a cost if you're going to serve the Lord with all your heart. But there is an amazing reward. It'll be inconvenient at times, cost you time, cost you money, your comfort, maybe even your health. And this is where I have a lot of stories. I could tell stories until we would be very late, but I saw it firsthand with all the old missionaries, the old timers. What you need to know is before they ever went, they counted the cost, okay? And back then, like I said, there wasn't communication. Way back then, many of them took a boat to get to their destination. These countries were filled with disease, and there weren't the medicines and the technology available. So many times it meant loss of their health, sometimes loss of life, definitely disconnection from family. Many times we're not able to even return when family members were gone. But my parents and many other missionaries believed They lived and they conveyed that Jesus was worth it. That's what they did. And I saw that. I saw that firsthand. And which was a good lesson to learn because, even when we went to Zaire, which is now Congo, there was a cost to pay. And we were planning on being there for at least 4 years before we ever came back the first time. So I had 2 young boys. I was planning on having a third child sometime during that time that I was there. What I wasn't planning on was being pregnant the very first month I got there, because I also am very sick when I'm pregnant. So going to a place that is 100 degrees with 100% humidity, no air conditioning, and sometimes no power was probably would not have been my plan to be sick and living in somebody else's house. But that is exactly what happened. And so we arrived, and I was pregnant, and I was sick. And then, after a while, I started getting better, and then I found out the really good news. This was part of the cost that I hadn't counted because I didn't know it existed. They started talking, they say, oh yeah, most everybody, foreigners who didn't grow up here, fly to either England, South Africa, or back to the States when they're going to deliver their baby. I'm like, yeah, great, that's not going to happen. We just had enough money to get here, and I'm not leaving, and I have 2 young boys, which I'm not leaving with my husband in a foreign country. So yeah, that's not going to happen. So what's my second option? So my second option was this little clinic called the Zaire American Clinic that had 1 doctor from the U.S. and had some African staff. So like, okay, yep, this is it. And and I started having my visits there and enjoying the heat that was happening while I was pregnant. And I was always happy when we had either electricity or water. Because if you had electricity, we had these big old metal fans, kind of like those, that you could, stand under. If we had water, you could take a cold shower. It was a bad day when both were out. Okay, and that did happen, yes. So anyway, but the Lord was in it all, and it was worth the cost, because that is where Rachel, who happens to be here, was born. So in a little one-room clinic where the American doctor didn't make it to in time, but thankfully the African midwife was there, and she did a fine job of delivering Rachel into the world. And so, it wasn't exactly how my other deliveries had gone. It wasn't exactly what I had planned, but the Lord was faithful in it all. And so there were many other things that occurred during that time. And, whether it was because of convictions or whether